Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So 2 instances of mass shootings over the weekend. Everybody, of course, is talking about the one in Virginia Beach where 12 people, 11 city employees, shot and killed by a city employee who had just resigned, just given his 2 weeks notice that morning via email.
And he was a civil engineer and had no priors. He was a good employee. They had no intention of firing him.
So it was 11 city employees and then one individual who was just there trying to get a permit from the city.
Yeah.
Another horrific event. Interesting, the coverage of this, and I give great compliments to Virginia Beach, how the municipality is handling it, and to some extent the press corps. Maybe the press corps is starting to learn something. One is the Virginia Beach municipal officials are just celebrating the victims' lives. They're not mentioning the shooter.
No.
And this is the lead. I'm going sort of by my memory, so I could be wrong, but we've covered a lot of these, unfortunately. This is the least amount of profile given to the shooter in the immediate hours after an attack like this that I can recall.
Yeah, and here's the Virginia police chief.
We're going to mention his name once, and then he will be forever referred to as the suspect, because our focus now is the dignity and respect to the victims in this case and to their families.
And they said that he was so, he entered the building that day, brushed his teeth in the washroom, made pleasantries with people, and then went on the shooting rampage. Shot a police officer in the chest, and thank God he had a bulletproof vest on that saved his life.
James Allen Fox, who's a professor at Northeastern University, studied mass shootings, said it's appropriate for law enforcement officials to release basic facts. It's news. We provide basic details on other types of offenders. It's the act, not the actor, that influences others, he said. The Columbine massacre, for example, inspired copycats, not the assailants' names and faces. However, Professor Fox also said, too much about the killer's background can humanize him or her and cross the line from news reporting to celebrity watch, macabre celebrity watch, but celebrity watch nonetheless. So I think so far from what we've heard and seen from municipal officials, in addition to the police responding, don't forget, it's worth reporting, he was shot and killed in a firefight with police officers.
Oh, yeah, that they said just, it sounded like a war zone.
And, of course, this gets immediately politicized, so that's handling it right. And then, of course, the Democrat socialist candidates for president run around talking about banning guns and their various plans to ban guns and restrict gun ownership for the law-abiding. And none of them, not a Booker, not a Gillibrand, none of them can offer anything specific with this situation because there's something bigger at play than the objects that mass murderers use to commit mass murder, isn't there? We've seen it with sharp objects, we've seen it with fertilizer bombs, we've seen it with vehicles, and we've seen it with guns. And in this case, we saw it with 2 .45 handguns that were legally purchased, as you mentioned, by a guy who had no criminal background, no history of mental health issues. So now what do you got? Maybe the deeper conversations that we try to have sometimes on this topic about the presence of evil in this world. For more on this topic, but also want to get to the state of play with the Mueller investigation, report, impeachment. We're pleased to be joined again by Kevin Brock, former Assistant Director of Intelligence for the FBI. He's an FBI Special Agent for 24 years and Principal Deputy Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He now works as the principal of New Street Global Solutions, which consults with private companies and public safety agencies on strategic mission technologies. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan, Amy. Thanks for having me back.
I know in your career at the FBI, among the many things that you did, you had the occasion to negotiate with hostage takers. And I just wonder if any of that training and real-world experience informs at all your review of a mass shooting incident like the one in Virginia Beach.
Yeah, it does. And I think you hit on one of the key topics today, and I agree with the approach of Virginia Beach police chief and authorities down there. In fact, I've written articles about this. Stop identifying these people by name. I know there's an overriding right in this country to know. That's operative at times. But in these situations where we're seeing these shootings occur again and again, I think that's one variable that can be taken off the table, because you are fundamentally dealing with an individual who is disturbed, whether psychologically ill or emotionally ill. There's something going on there. And in the negotiating world, we tended to break down these personality types into 4 different categories. When you see a shooting like this, it is usually someone who would be classified as a manic depressive. There's been some event in their life within the last 24 or 48 hours. It becomes a triggering event that overwhelms them, their capacity to cope as a depressed person, and they act out. Or there's a mix of having what we would refer to as being an inadequate personality, somebody whose life has just been one disaster after another, the low self-regard, self-esteem, and they're looking to do something to bring attention to themselves, even in a macabre way.
But it's so strange because this mass shooter, as opposed to other ones, no history of mental illness. No, he wasn't about to get fired from his job. They said that his record was completely clean at work. So it's hard for people to process.
Yeah, but
this.
why he resigned may be an insight, but we don't know.
Yeah, the tensions. We don't know the whole story, and having no record of mental illness doesn't mean an absence of it. Somebody who does something like this is obviously dealing with some type of trouble. So.
The other mass shooting that's underreported, even in Chicago, because it's just sort of like the daily stat sheet, unfortunately. 10 dead, 47 shot and wounded over the weekend in Chicago. Disproportionately minority family members affected, more minority families affected. And it's interesting because it dovetails with Bill Bratton, his op-ed in New York Daily News over the weekend, talking about broken windows again. I don't know why everybody's memory needs to be refreshed, but I'm glad he's doing it. I mean, this is somebody who served as the police chief in New York, L.A., Boston. He knows of what he speaks based on the results, particularly in New York, talking about making little things into big things to address some of the big things. That we're not doing that in Chicago. And there's often been calls in Chicago, and there will be again, bring in the National Guard, bring in the feds, because there's not a desire to examine the sort of philosophy of policing as advanced by the political civilian leadership of this city for at least the last 2 decades, probably more. And I just wonder, as a former federal official who looks at urban crime like this, how you see what's happening in L.A. and New York, and then something very different happening in Chicago.
Given a lot of thought about this throughout a long career. When I went into law enforcement, I'm not sure I was singularly prepared to see what I did see, and there is a subcurrent in this country of crime, violent crime, very violent crime happening. Really, most of the victims are women and children, and we tolerate that because it happens at a lower socioeconomic strata than those who are in power, and so it goes on and on and on. It's a 2-part equation. Chief Bratton is correct. There are concrete policing actions that can be taken to help mitigate and tamp this down, but there's a fundamental societal issue, which is harder, and nobody wants to talk about it. But it is a breakdown of family units where you have absentee fathers. I can tell you right now, I never arrested anyone who came from a wholly intact, functional family.
Wow.
Almost everyone that I came across that had to be incarcerated had some type of missing relationships, some type of dysfunction in the family, and generally it was because there was no father or an abusive father involved. And when these conditions exist, you're going to have violent crime. When we see a pattern in this country of children being born out of wedlock in record percentages, that is a predictor of future violent crime. So we don't like to talk about it. It's uncomfortable, but it is a factor.
I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about all things Mueller related under the impeachment umbrella. As somebody who was with the FBI for 24 years, you saw a former FBI director hold a press conference last week to say that his report speaks for itself. That's why he's there to speak for it. What did you make of Mueller's press conference?
Well, it harkens back to another press conference 3 years ago when a former FBI director took it upon himself to ascribe responsibilities that he didn't have and publicly make a pronouncement on whether or not somebody should be charged or not. The thing that, Dan, that disturbs me the most about both incidences is that if the Department of Justice is not going to charge someone with a crime, then they should remain silent. Mm-hmm. In both instances, both press conferences, we had an FBI director and a former FBI director, now Comey and Mueller, articulate things that they thought that the person did wrong, but they were unwilling to charge them. That is not the practice or the right of the Department of Justice to do. If you're not going to charge, then you remain silent. And this is a tradition and a right that we as Americans enjoy. If the government is going to investigate you, but is unable to charge you, then they cannot announce to the world all the other things that they found that they thought were wrong but unchargeable, because it damages reputations. And I think in this instance, we've seen too much of that in the last 3 years because we exist in a highly politically charged environment, and we're starting to forget the basic rights that should be extended to us as American citizens.
So do you think Mueller spoke in order to, persuade Congress to begin impeachment proceedings?
That seems to be one angle, and I think he implied that. I think the Attorney General rightfully addressed that by saying that the Department of Justice, and he's correct in this, the Department of Justice is a separate branch of government. It is there to determine whether somebody should be charged with a crime. It is not there to do the work of Congress or to highlight or to signal or to telegraph concerns that the Department of Justice has that they're unable to charge, and that so Congress should take it up. The Congress has a less of a federal law threshold to cross in order to impeach the president. They can impeach the president for almost any reason if they get the votes. But the point is, the Department of Justice's investigation is a separate investigation and should stand on its own.
In an interview with CBS News last week, Attorney General Barr made the point about the Praetorian Guard. Sometimes in politics, and this is why it's important to look at potential government abuse, sometimes in politics you get people who substitute their judgment for the rule of law because they see themselves as guardians of the people. So they can supervene the will of the majority depending on whether what they believe to be right and proper and true, regardless of agency protocols, the will of the people, or the rule of law. And it certainly seemed like he was referencing Comey and perhaps his old friend Bob Mueller as well.
Yeah, nowhere in the U.S. Constitution do we see a call for Praetorian Guard or any responsibilities provided in that regard. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. The Constitution is written carefully to protect against government overreach, to protect against people using the law for caprice or for some reason out of curiosity or ideological differences. Specifically prevents that type of thing. So people acting on their own, out of their own opinion, out of their own imagined right of justice is clearly wrong and antithetical to all our values.
Mueller said, I'm not taking any questions.
Resigned and walked away.
Well, right. Do you think he should be held, and since he decided to break his silence, do you think he should be held before Congress? I mean, in other words, invited or subpoenaed to testify, to subject himself to some questions the same way Attorney General Barr did?
Before I answer that, let me just make one clarification out of the spirit of transparency.
Mm-hmm.
I worked closely with Director Mueller as one of his assistant directors for a number of years, and all the things that you hear people say publicly about his integrity, his dedication to this country is true. He's a Purple Heart veteran of the Marine Corps. He has dedicated his whole life to the ideals of the country and the Constitution. That doesn't mean that any of us can make decisions that are disagreeable to other people, and in this regard, there's room for disagreement on how he approached it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not he should go before Congress to answer questions. I'm not going to. I don't think he has to. I don't think he owes the country anything more than what he has done. I think he would go probably at his own risk, because how these things turn out, and that's probably what prompted his offer to testify, but only in private. He doesn't, understandably, and I think admirably, want to have his words used by the political class, which they will be, any more than they already have.
All right. He is Kevin Brock, former assistant director of Intel for the FBI agent for 24 years, principal deputy director of the National Counterterrorism Center, now a principal at New Street Global Solutions, which consults with private companies and public safety agencies on strategic mission technologies. Kevin, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here